Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another video in MrEncyclopedia channel about coding in C++, where today we're going to talk about and while loops. If you haven't watched the outline video where I've basically written out the code or the framework for the code in C++ and for all your code to be stored, then please do watch that. It's a video on my channel, and then come back to this one. Okay, so like I mentioned before, we're going to go over for loops and while loops, and do a little problem with for loops, or any of the loops that we choose, but I would especially go with for loops as it is more common. Okay, so first, let's write out our beginning. So, if you don't remember this, we call in library for IOStream, and then we use namespace std. Which is another way to say, instead of just constantly writing this out to print something or to take in something, we just don't use std at all. And so just using this one line, we can just, for instance, say this to, or cout to print something. And of course, we need something inside. We need to keep it inside something else, and that's why we use int main. And int main automatically calls for the main code that's to be run, and any other function that you define out of the int main, you will probably need to connect it back to the int main so that it will show up in the output. So, to speak a bit about for loops, I feel like I've covered pretty much the basics of in the outline video, but to go delve deep just specifically into for loops. A for loop, so I'm gonna go like this. Okay. A for loop looks a bit like this. Let's give it for. Let's do like count I. Okay, so basically what this for loop does is it repeats that loop for the keyword being for, however, as long as you specify the limit. So in this case, we have three parts that go inside that for loop. So first up is the initializing the variable. So you can basically initialize any variable. I is one of the most common for loops, which I also typically use, but sometimes if you're writing nested for loops, which we'll cover a bit after we just talk about this, but basically it's a for loop inside a for loop, or just nested loops in general, or just loops inside loops, and they help iterate through much more larger sets. So if we initialize this variable I, if we initialize another for loop, let's say like a separate one, it's fine to use the same variable. But if you're initializing that inside this for loop, then it's gonna be, you can't call it I, you're gonna have to call it maybe another letter like J, because you can't have that same variable existing at two for loops within each other at the same time. So that's pretty much the basic outline, and what this basically means is this is that variable, and we set it to a value, so I set it to 0, and then this is our limit. So here, since it's less than 4, it's going to repeat that many amount of times. So, and then I++ basically just means that after every single loop, I is going to increase by a value. So it's going to be from 0 to 1 to 3, 2, 2, 3, like that. So let me just run this. There we go. So it's until 3, because since we initialize it to 0 and I less than 4 ensures that there are 4 values that are going to be printed out. And that's why, since we initialize their first value to be 0, then their first value is going to be 0. So the reason why I don't see 4 is because even though it says less than 4, it's starting with 0, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, which are the 4 numbers or integers. And if you set it to I to 1, then it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and you still don't see 4, because keep in mind that the 4 is not just I meant 4 integers as in the last set, because it's not a number that's included, it's a limit. So basically it starts at 1, 2, 3, and all these integers are less than the number 4. And that's something to keep in mind. So if you say less than or equal to 4, then obviously 4 is going to be included. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you put I as equal to 0, you're going to get 5 integers. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you do the same thing for any number. And that's basically how the loop works. So the main reason why this loop is so beneficial is because you wouldn't want to write something like, you wouldn't want to write like a list of couts just to do the same thing. Like, let me just this. Okay, so if you constantly write count 0, count 1, so if you constantly or keep on writing that, then it's first of all going to be tiring. You don't want to do that, and it's mundane, it's going to be boring. But also, here, 4, it's just a small number, right? It's relatively easy to just copy and paste those lines and just make it until 4. But what if you had to, a problem was given to you and they said for, let's say, 6,000. You wouldn't want to do a count or cout until 6,000. And if you see here, it's still generating. So you get a list of all these numbers. Probably just gonna use slider over here. You're gonna get a list of all these numbers, and it doesn't, the space is already gone. Like, this is basically showing that the terminal can't show, in this case, more than 1,000 integers. And if you were to write out those 1,000 integers by hand, like cout 1, cout 2, all the way up until 6,000, then you'll probably spend like 2 days doing that instead of just using this loop. So these small things can be really powerful, and this is just one really common application of it. We'll show you more examples, but now, before we talk about nested loops, I just want to give you the basic of a while loop. So let's say we take that int I and we do it 0. And now we say while I is less than 4. Just, let's say, hello world, right? Okay, so what this is gonna do is, what do you guys think it's gonna do? If you think it's gonna do it 4 times, because the for loop did it, we had like I less than 4, and it depends not how many times, but like here, since we're inputting like a string like hello world, how many times do you think it's gonna do it? And if you said 4, then I need you to watch the output. So, see the slider over here, whenever we move it down, it's automatically going up. It's because it's infinitely producing, I'm going to delete this, but it's infinitely producing as many hello worlds as possible. And you might be wondering, well, why? Like a for loop, if you did less than 4, then it's going to do maybe at least 4 times, or less than 4. So the reason why is because this is a while loop. A while loop basically executes that code as long as whatever statement is inside it is true. So if you put a y, I is equal to 0, and if you put that as equal to 0, and we put I while I is less than 4, we're not adding anything to I, we're not subtracting the I is always going to stay 0. So when we say while I is less than 4, it's going to print out infinitely, because I is always going to be less than 4. 0 is always less than 4. However, if we do I is equal to 4, now it's not going to print anything because 4 is not less than 4. 4 is equal to 4. But if we add the equal sign, it's going to print out hello world infinitely again. Like, I can't... Okay. It's just going to continuously generating hello world. And yeah, okay, bye. So that's the essence of a while loop. It's mainly for generating almost infinite, and also to check if something is true, because if you know that here 4 it's just something that we know, but there may be more complex problems that require us to say if it's a number that's more than 4, less than 4, or maybe you don't even know the number at all. It's going to be user input. So that's mainly why. And now we're just gonna look over nested loops. And let's see here. We're just gonna do a for loop first. Let's do 10 this time. And plus. And like, remember when I told you nested loop, since this for loop is inside, I'll show you if you use the same variable. It's probably, even though it may look like it works, right? Let's see if we print I. So you'd be thinking, why isn't this printing continuously? It's because it takes 10 sets of eyes, and essentially what this code is doing is it's going from 0 to 9, which is 10 integers, and it's repeating that for 10 times. That's the power of nested loops. And the reason why you wouldn't want to use another variable of I inside is because usually just coding, when you just talk about the environment or just the coding itself, if you are a coder, then it's not really something that you're supposed to do. It kind of makes it more, it's going to make a conundrum. It's going to be more confusing. So what you would do is, if you do J now, and now if you print I, you'll see the difference. So here, if you print I, you're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you're getting 10 of each number from 0 to 9. Now, if you print J, you're getting that thing that we did, or that we got in our previous example, where 0 to 9, and that's 10 sets of 0 to 9. And so that's mainly the difference. It's because for this I, you're basically just going through the numbers 0 to 9 just once, but you're repeating each and every single number just 10 times, or whatever times the number is. We just put a 10, but it can be any number. But if you put it on J, which is inside that I loop, then you'll basically get 10 sets of a normal list of 0 to 9. And that difference is really helpful to keep in mind, and that's also what makes a nested loop a nested loop. And you can go even into more, you can say like 10 nested loops at once, though that would be crazy. It's still possible. And essentially that's mainly it for the for loop nested loop. And it is a very powerful tool, because just like how I told you how one for loop where it iterate through multiple sets of single integers that you wouldn't want to write like C out each integer and print it out each time, it's just like how one for loop just does that in the Flash. This nested for loops, or these nested for loops, they're acting as the exact same analogy as C out is to one for loop. The same thing is one for loop to nested for loops. So what I mean by that is, instead of constantly doing for loop, and then a separate for loop, and then a separate for loop. If you want to repeat multiple things at a time, just do it within each other. You'll be more compactful, more space saving, especially in code, and of course more powerful. And it can lead to many great things you can develop using maybe matrices, which we'll talk about, and using arrays. And arrays are really helpful. And there will be another video just about solely arrays, where I will also show you how arrays can be iterated through using for loops, and you can basically receive inputs in arrays through for loops, and you can print out whatever the user inputted through the arrays using that same for loop. So keep in mind, and that'll be our next tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.